In this video, you will learn how to identify and punctuate participial phrases. A participle is a verb form that can be used as an adjective. Present participles end in ing. The laughing children played in the snow. Often we see the word laughing, we think, oh, that's a verb, it's an action. But in this sentence, it's describing the children, so it's actually a participle. Past participles end in ed. For lunch, I ordered a Caesar salad with grilled chicken. Grilled can be a verb. I grilled the chicken. But in this sentence, just like the previous sentence, the word grilled is being used to describe the chicken, so it's also a participle. Participial phrases take the participle and they add on any modifiers or complements of the participle. Within participial phrases, the entire phrase functions together as an adjective. Climbing the stairs, my son tried not to use the rail. In this sentence, climbing is the participle. The stairs completes the meaning of climbing, so climbing the stairs is the participial phrase. That entire phrase describes son. It's functioning as an adjective, not as a verb. The review session scheduled for next week has been canceled. Scheduled is the participle. Scheduled for next week is the entire participial phrase. That entire phrase functions as an adjective telling us which review session. Participial phrases and commas. When placed at the beginning of a sentence, the participial phrase is followed by a comma. Texting in the hallway, the boy tripped over his own shoelaces. Texting is the participle. Texting in the hallway is the participial phrase. That entire phrase describes the boy. Since it comes at the beginning of the sentence, it's functioning as an introductory element. You need to set it off from the rest of the sentence with a comma. Gathered together in the library, the students studied all day for the final exam. Gathered is the participle. Gathered together in the library is the participial phrase. That entire phrase describes the students. And again, since it comes at the beginning of the sentence, functioning as an introductory element to the entire sentence, you set it off with a comma. You should also place commas around non-restrictive participial phrases. These are also sometimes called non-essential phrases. A phrase is considered non-restrictive if it is there to add color and interest to a sentence, but is not necessary to the basic meaning of the sentence. The teacher, expecting the students to do their homework, gave an unannounced quiz on the material. In this sentence, the participial phrase expecting the students to do their homework will be considered non-restrictive because I don't need it to know which teacher is being spoken about. It just tells me more about the teacher. It adds interest to the sentence. But if I take it away, I don't lose meaning. I still know which teacher is being spoken about. However, when you have a restrictive phrase, also called an essential phrase, you don't place commas around it. Commas really are a signal very often that you can take the information away and it doesn't affect the overall meaning of the sentence. So logically, if I need information in the sentence, I can't put commas around it. The student chosen to represent the school was overwhelmed by the responsibility. In this sentence, chosen to represent the school is the participial phrase, but this would be considered restrictive or essential because it tells me which student is overwhelmed. If I take it away, the student was overwhelmed by the responsibility, I have no idea which student is being spoken about. I need to know the chosen to represent the school. It restricts and tells us exactly which student we're talking about, so I should not put commas around that phrase. Here's some practice. Identify the participial phrases in the sentences below. Draw an arrow to the word being modified, then add any necessary commas. This would be the time to pause the video. After you finish completing the practice, resume the video to check your answers. Number 1, waiting over an hour for the doctor, Sam lost his patience and left. Waiting over an hour for the doctor is the participial phrase. Waiting is the participle. Over an hour and for the doctor tell us, they complete the meaning of waiting. They essentially modify waiting. That's how we know they're part of that participial phrase. The entire participial phrase tells us more about Sam. And since this is an introductory participial phrase, I must set it off from the rest of the sentence with a comma. Number 2, my puppy, frightened by the storm, tried to hide in the shower. In this sentence, frightened by the storm is the participial phrase. Frightened is a past participle. The main verb of the sentence is tried. Frightened by the storm describes the puppy. It's telling us more about her. This could also be considered a non-restrictive participial phrase. I don't need this phrase to tell me which puppy we're talking about. I don't need the meaning to be restricted in any way. It's not essential to the sentence. I could just say my puppy tried to hide in the shower. This tells us why and adds a little bit of interest, but it's not necessary, so I put commas around it. Number 3, 2 short stories written by Edgar Allan Poe were anthologized in our literature textbook. In this sentence, written by Edgar Allan Poe is the participial phrase. Written is the participle. That phrase describes the stories. Which stories are we talking about? In this sentence, the participial phrase is essential. We need it to know which short stories are being spoken about. 2 short stories were anthologized in our literature textbook. It's too vague and it doesn't give us the information that we need. To some extent, whether or not something is essential or non-essential is at the discretion of the writer. The context will factor in. So when you're making these determinations, use your best judgment based on what the sentence gives you and whether or not that information seems like enough to be very clear to the reader what you're talking about with the noun.